Hello and welcome back to another YouTube video. Today I'm going to be doing my 14.14 jungle tier list. So if you enjoy the content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. Once again, there were a plethora of changes this patch. We saw so many AP junglers get hit by either indirect nerfs, whether this is through lanes or just direct nerfs, reducing their power, making them less effective, alongside the pairings of obviously Corki and Tristana and competitive, but we've seen some of that AD mids rise, and obviously with all these nerfs come some new kind of meta or like rising junglers, which I will talk about in this video. So let's begin. The D tier is still going to consist of mainly the same champions. Garen, Malphite, obviously, both these top laners rarely played in the jungle, but tend to be pretty poor. Malphite's substantially worse than Garen. Garen can kind of clear and kind of be effective if you give him like a decent amount of gold. Malphite, for the most part, there's no real value picking him as a jungler. Sylas is a very explosive pick. If you can pilot the champion well, get really ahead early on into the game, you can definitely have really pop-off games. His explosiveness does also kind of lend to being pretty poor, though. His clear is a bit weaker than a lot of the other champions, very predicated on getting the gold and being able to amplify your ability to clear and take objectives, because once again, that is still pretty weak. He doesn't have great sustain within the jungle. He is also going to be within my D tier. Rengar, an incredibly elite skewed pick, probably the most elite skewed pick in the game. Massively, I would recommend just avoiding this champion for average and low elo, which is once again what I tailor my tier list to. If you obviously you put the games in, you will be very much rewarded, but he tends to be a very OTP played champion. You don't really see him outside of those scenarios. Skarner has been underperforming ever since his last set of nerfs. They really hit him quite hard. They are buffing him in 14.15 as he is currently underperforming quite heavily in both top and the jungle. Nidalee, I'm actually going to drop down with the nerfs to Nidalee. I believe this pick is incredibly not to the same extent as Rengar. She is obviously still elite skewed, but now becomes a lot weaker to play for the average player. Obviously, once again, you need to put a lot of games into this champion. You need to be in like really getting your invades down, getting your ganks down, making sure you're executing the combos correctly, and yeah, the champion can still work, but it's considerably weaker, no longer carried as much by base damages, very reliant on snowballing, and now she drops down to the D tier. Moving on to the C tier, so we will have a couple of new additions here. The standard, obviously, Maokai, Neferi, both of them, well, in Maokai's case, he got nerfed pretty heavily. He was obviously taking over competitive, and he still does see a level of competitive play, obviously being a low resource taking tank jungler definitely helps in that kind of environment. In Neferi's case, she got buffed more recently for the jungle, just wasn't really enough, so she also sits within the C tier, but she's a fairly low, or maybe not low risk, but low execution threshold jungler, where you can kind of, she's very stat checky, and that can help her in terms of ease of play, but does make her predictable and oftentimes exploitable if you understand what the champion does. Other than that, we are going to add Trundle down here. So Trundle has been underperforming for a while. Obviously, he is one of the easiest to play champions in the game. He is very stat checky. He's just not performing great. His clear is relatively slow. He doesn't scale particularly well, especially against a lot of the picks currently within the meta. And he goes from the B tier down to the C tier. Alongside Trundle, Eve is still underperforming. They nerfed her pre like their AP kind of takeover of junglers, which has been unfortunate because it would have been nice to see a level of Eve in competitive. Obviously, Champ's just not at that kind of level at the moment, and yeah, she belongs in the C tier. Gragas, Talia, both got nerfed more recently. Talia primarily just jungle skewed nerfs, Gragas more directed towards top lane, but had a knock-on effect in jungle. He was already pretty elite skewed and kind of to a degree underperforming, reliant on being able to one-shot targets and using his displacement effectively. His clear is relatively slow, and he also lands himself a spot within the C tier. Zyra is also going to be joining these champions. She got nerfed this patch, obviously kind of picked up throughout the last two patches by pro play junglers. Her clear obviously was incredibly fast. Her team fighting is very oppressive. If you can like get control over objectives, it's very hard to ever really punish this champion, but the nerfs have definitely hurt that a bit, so she drops down to the C tier. Kindred also got nerfed this patch. She was already an elite skewed pick, tended to operate a bit better there. Obviously, if you fail to get good invades, find tempo within the game, you'll really struggle. You're really reliant on your marks to kind of stay relevant throughout the game. Otherwise, you do end up just being pretty early game, mid game skewed, reliant on like a level of stats checky auto attack nature. But yeah, if you get your marks, you snowball, you're playing them out correctly, you can still definitely be rewarded on this pick, but not to the same degree as you would have once. I believe the nerfs ended up being base health and Q-AD ratio, or just flat Q damage, because they kind of like shifted, changed what they wanted to do with the champion. So she lands herself a spot within the C tier. Moving up from the C tier, we have Pantheon. So Pantheon is performing a bit better at the moment. He's pretty easy to play. His ganks are fairly standard on how you execute them. His clear isn't as egregious as it once, isn't as bad as it once was. He's obviously received a couple of buffs to amp his clear speed. It looks, I mean, it has for a while, but it looks like Q max into W max tends to be a pretty standard way of just playing this champion. There is a very high elo Korean player who does play the champion in the jungle, and I would recommend checking him out if you want to kind of learn the pick and put some games into it. Zed got buffed this patch. He benefited within the jungle about a bit more to a degree than he did in the mid lane. Obviously, base damages really help clear speed. The E change doesn't really matter as much within the jungle, but he's definitely benefiting a bit more from that, and he is going to also be moved up to the B tier. I haven't actually got him here, but yeah, he's doing a bit better at the moment. Alongside these two, Hekam also performing a bit better. He was obviously weak for a while, but the changes this patch have definitely brought him back into being a relevant champion again, and he is now a solid B tier option. Once again, if you put the games in, he can be very obnoxious to play against. He's pretty stat checky with his Q, and oftentimes if he has the damage, he can just run through teams. If he doesn't, he will dive in and oftentimes just explode. Another champion, which I'm going to drop down from the A tier to the B tier, is Vi. Vi has been on a downward trajectory for a while. Whether this is through adjustments in the jungle, people learning how to play against the pick more frequently, changes to lanes. Obviously, Vi is pretty dependent on lane matchups. AD mid lane is increasing popularity, really does hurt Vi quite a bit, as you do end up having a lot of AD in your team, increasing the value of tanks and tabis, stuff like this, and she's dropping down from the A tier to the B tier for the moment. Lee Sin, also going to be my B tier, obviously tends to be a bit harder to pilot. Lee Sin has a pretty infinite skill curve. The more games you put into the champion, the more you'll be rewarded. For the moment, he is going to stay within the B tier for the average player. Talon doing a bit better, obviously, after his buffs in 14.12, I believe. The pick obviously relies a bit on invading, being able to kind of snowball, not as egregiously as Silas. Silas is the very extreme of this, kind of like Twitch jungle. Talon kind of finds in a middle ground. Obviously, if you get your items going, he can very much snowball and take over games. Elise doing alright at the moment. She does tend to be a bit elite skewed, but the AP junglers being nerfed has kind of left her being in this middle ground. Obviously, if we do continuously see more and more of these picks being nerfed, then there is a high chance Elise might re-show, but for the moment she is going to sit within the B tier. Graves got the 2 armor buff in 14.13, I believe. It didn't really push him back up to one of the higher tiers, but he's definitely doing a bit better at the moment. He finds himself within the B tier. For Teemo, there is a genuine argument that this champion could unironically be pushed up to the A tier. The continuous nerf to AP junglers combined with AD junglers obviously gaining more or being played a bit more is definitely going to help this champion. Obviously, he also kind of got he got buffed strictly this patch, being able to go invis a bit quicker, and it could lead to a genuine argument that this champion should actually be in the A tier. Obviously, he does fall off quite heavily with rank. The higher elo you go, the more obvious and ways of countering this champion there are. You're not going to see as many auto attack based. You're not going to see as much just played auto attack range champions as a response to this pick. You're going to need to use this pick as a response to those auto attackers. I completely butchered that. Yeah, the pick obviously reliant on control over objectives. If you're playing into a lot of range, obviously your streams can be cleared a bit easier, but into melee, you can obviously still have a pretty good time. The champion does benefit from range with the Q, so he can function against both. But for the moment, he is going to be my B tier. argument that he could be pushed up into the A tier. Sejuani and Poppy are two of the tanks in this tier. Sejuani obviously doing really well and competitive at the moment. The buffs she received at the beginning of the split, I believe in 14.10, have really helped her quite a bit within solo queue and competitive. In Poppy's case, she tends to come out more as a counter pick option into high mobility comps, and she lands herself as a solid B tier option. Kayn tends to operate a bit better on red Kayn at the moment. Blue Kayn's really kind of fallen out of favor. Obviously, they did give a bit of love to red Kayn, like giving him the health ratio on the passive, increasing his increasing his Omni Vamp, which definitely did help him, and he lands himself a spot within the B tier. Belveth stays fairly neutral, not a huge amount of change here, obviously losing a bit of base range in gaining that back through the ultimate. Yeah, it'll be a bit of an elite skewed nerf and stay relatively power neutral for the average player. Mundo is going to be added to my B tier. If you've watched I Will Dominate, or you know of Natty Nat, you might have seen this pick gaining a bit of traction. It doesn't seem to be as successful as some of the other champions. Obviously, it's pretty easy to execute. It scales incredibly well. If you're not being punished, then there's definitely a lot of value to this champion. But no hard CC definitely does hurt a tank jungler, and he kind of finds himself in like this middle ground where if you can get the resources you need, scale up throughout the game, then you can be quite valuable, but you're not going to get as much XP and gold as you would in the top lane, and not having hard CC definitely can feel quite punishing at times, so he lands himself a spot within the B tier. Shaco also going to be my B tier. AP Shaco looks to be the best performing of the two at the moment. Obviously, there's a lot of great items for AP Shaco. AD Shaco can function, obviously it's still fine if you're running like your Halo Blades and you're snowballing throughout the game. It is a very early game skewed. In Shaco, AP Shaco's case, it tends to be a bit more late game skewed. You're very reliant around your boxes, objective control, kind of akin to Teemo, except from you're really good into melee champions, which can't really deactivate your boxes without obviously proccing them first, and he finds himself within the beta. Nunu has been kind of underperforming for a while, not to like the same extent as some of the C and D tier champions, but for a pick which is primarily OTP'd, he should, I feel like, be a bit better, but anyway, I digress. He is going to stay within the B tier for the moment. And then the three other champions we have, which are continuously staying in the B tier, are Wukong, who is very item dependent. This pick, if it gets its items, is very strong. If it struggles to really find its spikes, then you can be punished. Obviously, it's reliant on its team fighting. It scales relatively well. Not so good early on to the game, unless you can really build up your passive and you're playing against a lot of the AD picks. Rek'Sai is once again primarily just OTP'd. She's kind of gone back to being as unpopular as she once was. Obviously, the nerfs did hurt her back in like 14.10, I believe, or 14.11, and she kind of sits within the B tier for the moment. In Yi's case, he went from being really bad to really strong, and then they nerfed him, and now he's kind of average again, which, I mean, is a pretty fine spot for Yi to be in. He is about where he should be, and yeah, a solid B tier option. Dropping down from the A tier, we have a couple of picks. So Jax got nerfed this patch. The E cooldown going up early onto the game hurts his early clear. You're primarily just using Jax jungle as a counter pick to the likes of Xin Zhao. That is where a lot of his power shines. But for now, he drops from the A tier to the B tier. Losing base damage on your Q as Rumble really does hurt your clear as well, and he drops from the A tier down to the B tier alongside Jax. Vi, I've already moved down, and yeah, that is what I'm going to move down to the B tier. That is my B tier for this patch. Moving up to the A tier, so I'm going to leave with Gwen. I believe Gwen is actually better in the jungle, just generically, than she is in the top lane. Top lane, you're a bit more reliant on being a counter pick, opting into like primarily just tank matchups. You're not really going to be able to blind Gwen, but if you can get, if you play Gwen jungle and you can get the resources you need, you're not as dependent on tank junglers. Obviously, not having hard CC, being a AP hyper carry can feel quite punishing at times, but as a lot of them kind of exist within the meta at the moment, you can definitely have a place, and she is a solid A tier pick at the moment. Mordekaiser, is a really good low elo AP jungler. He definitely does fall off the higher rank you go, but for the moment, if you use him as like a counter pick and a solid answer to some of the tank options, you can be really stat checky. You can still have a fine time into a lot of the other picks at the moment, and he is a solid A tier champion. Morgana doing a bit better at the moment. Obviously also benefiting from Fated Ashes being in a really good spot for her. Mordekaiser is also in kind of like the same spot where they do benefit from Fated Ashes. It does enable a lot of these AP junglers, and she finds herself a spot within the A tier. Zac, I'm actually going to put Zac, Diana, and Echo beneath these three. These three picks, well, I think Diana is the best of the three. Zac obviously got nerfed in 14.12. Echo not performing as well in the jungle at the moment, but kind of akin to Diana. Diana is actually performing a bit better than these two, but received buffs more recently. Obviously, the attack speed ratio buff, which she received, did definitely help her within the jungle, and she kind of sits above these champions. But like Zac, Echo, pretty close to the B tier, but still probably deserving of an A tier spot. Zac is a solid AP tank jungler if you're looking for one. If you want something a bit easier though, Amumu is still there. Briar is also going to be within my A tier, a very, very low elo skewed pick. Both Mordekaiser and Briar fall into that bracket where if you understand the functionality of the champion, oftentimes they can be quite exploitable. In Briar's case, she's very stat checky, and yeah, but that is kind of where she sits at the moment. Standard bruiser itemization, you're running your Conqueror, stuff like that, and she is a solid A tier pick. Does fall off with Elo though. Kha'Zix and Viego, obviously Kha'Zix really doing quite a bit better with the buffs he received. The 10 flat damage on Q helped his clear speed, helped his ability to snowball throughout the game, so he really benefited from that. In Viego's case, he is probably the most he is one of the most generic solid AD junglers. Like, he's kind of found himself this position just beneath Lee Sin. Lee Sin obviously a bit harder to execute than Viego. Viego can be a bit more comp dependent, but if you get snowballing, you get possessors going, you pilot the pick well, he is a great A tier option, very deserving of a spot here. If you're in Elite, I would probably consider this champion like S tier, but for the average player, a bit more of an A tier pick. Warwick is going to be also in my A tier. He's a bit more gimmicky than a lot of the picks in the jungle, but if you can snowball on this champion, if you get your itemization down, like your bulks, and then like usually a Tiamat option. I've seen people going like Ravenous, I've seen people going Stridebreaker. I prefer Stridebreaker. I think it's got a lot of value within the jungle. Of course, Titanic Hydra also can have value here. But for the moment, Warwick, a very solid A tier champion. Jarvan, Xin Zhao, you're easy to execute AD junglers. If you get the value in the game, if you make them valuable within the game, you like in Jarvan's case, getting your early ganks going, kind of playing around one lane, really punishing the enemy if they overstep. He can be really valuable. In Zin's case, he's a bit more stat checky. He can look to invade a lot more. He can obviously fight skirmish a lot more frequently than Jarvan. In Jarvan's case, he's a bit more of a diver. Xin Zhao is a bit more of a skirmisher. But both of them, great, easy to play A tier AD options. Alongside these two picks, the other two champions I've got here are Fiddlesticks and Ivan. Fiddlesticks very OTP played, and honestly Ivan for the most part is also very heavily OTP'd, but if you put the games in, you'll be very much rewarded. Fiddlesticks, obviously it's for gank angles, for big team fight ultimates, being able to power farm and then find these angles is where most of his power budget lies. In Ivan's case, he is very reliant on his team, but if you've obviously got someone to play around and you're getting a lot of value out of your shields and your W, then this pick can be very powerful within the jungle. Make sure you land the clear though. Obviously it is very important that you're clearing fast on Ivan and getting the most effective way down for you or for what the game state is. Moving on to the S tier, so we have a couple of champions here. I've missed Karthus, so Karthus is going to be my B tier. Karthus obviously got nerfed quite two times, both towards his Q, which nerfed his ability to clear, and has definitely landed himself a spot within the B tier. He tends to be a bit more elite skewed anyway. I wouldn't recommend him so much for the average player. If you want an AP option, there are a lot of easy to execute, and honestly I'd say stronger picks than Karthus, but you can still be very much rewarded if you play this pick and put the games into him. Moving on to the S tier. So we have Rammus. Rammus is an incredible counter pick option to AD champions into some of the like heavy AD drafts. If you see like an AD jungle, AD mid pairing alongside like an ADC and then like an engaged champion, something like a Nautilus, this pick has incredible value and it can be very hard for them to ever really play against you. And I don't usually have counter pick champions within the S tier, but in Rammus's case, because he is so oppressive in these situations, he can very much be a win, like just a winning factor. So if you find those angles, make sure you're picking Rammus and you'll be rewarded with wins for it, for sure. Udyr and who else does I move up? So Udyr I've moved up because he is now benefiting from the fact that a lot of the other junglers have been nerfed. Obviously, this is the Liandry into just primarily tank variation Udyr. I wouldn't recommend going AD that much as standard, but like if you need AD within your comp, then it can be something you opt into. Amumu is my easy go-to jungler. Like if you're auto-filled, I'd recommend playing Amumu within the jungle. He's very easy to play. He has so much CC built into his kit. His clear is very healthy. Lots of AoE. There's just lots of value to play this playing this champion. Obviously, Conqueror tends to... Conqueror is a solid keystone. Aftershock tends to be a bit less performant. Liandry is what I'd recommend as first item option, unless you're really struggling, in which case you can just go Sunfire into like very standard tank variations. But you want to be confident in the game that you're going to be useful. And like Liandry just has so much value on this pick. And Liandry, Sunfire into tank variation tends to be pretty solid on this pick. Abyssal and Frozen Heart, good cheap options if you're looking for like a specific type of resistance. Nocturne is still in a great spot at the moment. Obviously, now that people have primarily gone Stridebreaker as a first item option on him, his win rate has really shot up. But he has been strong for like the longest amount of time. Obviously, pretty easy to execute playstyle. Great AD jungler at the moment. Probably what I'd recommend is the go-to AD jungler. Obviously, Viego tends to be a bit better in Elite. Xin Jarvan, a bit easier to execute and obviously have strengths in other areas. But if like you want an AD pool, then Nocturne, Xin, Jarvan, Viego are probably what I'd recommend as being like good options. Volibear, a bit more of a tanky AD option, but kind of just going like your standard Sky into like Deadmans and then standard tank or like hybrid tank AD options, and he's in a great spot at the moment. Obviously a great top lane flex as well with the Riftmaker Flicker Blades or Roa Flicker Blades build variations. Brand got nerfed this patch alongside Lilia, and both of them are now going to be in my S tier. Brand is probably towards the low end. Lilia still kind of sits at the high end. She didn't really take as much of a hit as I reckon Riot wanted them to, so they might come back and take another swing. In Brand's case, I imagine we'll leave him in the spot he's in now. He's pretty close to the A tier. Obviously, they nerfed the E cooldown and flat damage, which hurts his ability to clear as fast. And yeah, that has kind of put him towards the bottom of the S tier. But his AoE damage is still some of the best in the game. And if you can get those scenarios, then you can solo win team fights for your team. And Shyvana. So Shyvana is probably my hidden OP, but like kind of now pretty known pick of the patch. Obviously has really benefited from a lot of the champions being nerfed. Her win rate over like the last 3 patches has gone up by like 3 to 2%, which is a huge amount to gain. Obviously, really benefited from Fate, is really benefiting from the Shojin changes, from Liandry changes, from Riftmaker changes. Like all 3 of these items are substantially better than they were in the previous split, as they did get adjusted. Alongside this, she also benefited from more XP being within the jungle, allows her to hit her level 6 spike earlier, making her stronger within the game faster on. Obviously, Drake's being incredibly important at the moment, and like Soul being a great win condition, also running benefits to this champion. She really does enjoy Drake stacking. That is where a level of her power budget lies, dealing a bit more damage to monsters. And yeah, she's really benefited from all the like nerfs which have come towards other junglers, and she will get nerfed this patch. I don't doubt that by any means. She is the best low elo jungler in the game. Maybe not so much in high elo, but with how powerful she is and how easily executable this champion is, she is probably gonna get nerfed. So yeah, Shyvana gonna be my recommended go-to pick of the patch, unless you're like Masters Plus, and then I would recommend like other things, but there are lots of options there, and oftentimes it's better just to stick to what you're good at once you hit like those higher ranks. But yeah, those are my thoughts for the average jungle tier list. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.